We may introduce Alec here in just a minute. Alec was going to introduce Dr. James Lane, but Dr. Lane, for most of us, needs no introduction. He has led the Department of Education for a few years now, but more specifically, he's led us through this pandemic and has done a fantastic job. We appreciate his leadership. We appreciate his availability. And, as you know, Dr. Lane has been to every school division in our Commonwealth now. And I think he truly understands the needs of our rural school divisions. I'm sure that at the end of his presentation that Alec may be back on and we'll say some other great things about him as to his bio. But with no further ado, Dr. Lane, I'll turn the podium over to you.
Thanks, Keith, and great to see everyone here at the summit. I'm excited to be with you today. I have about 10 or 15 minutes, and if you're not aware, Dr. Perigin and I are on the School Modernization Commission, and I did a presentation last week for them, and I thought I would share some of that data because it is important to kind of set the context for what we're looking at in the Commonwealth. So let me get my screen share going. So again, great to see everyone and welcome back from lunch. I think that's my role, is to welcome you back from lunch formally, but I'm going to make some other comments as well. Of course, for those of you that are not educators, our strategic plan at the Virginia Department of Education is focused on maximizing the potential of all learners in the Commonwealth, and we believe our mission is doing that through equitable and innovative learning. And I think with facilities being such a focus of today's summit, it's impossible to do some of that equitable and innovative learning without some of the more innovative learning spaces, not only of buildings of the last 10 years, but maybe even of the last 30 years. I also, just before I get into my comments on facilities, want to make sure that everyone's aware of our Virginia Learns guidance, which went live about a month and a half ago. But it talks about how we may recover from this pandemic, and some of that speaks to facilities and some of the guidance there. But as I transition into the school building piece, I think it's important to remember that even when schools were closed, we never stopped. Everyone kept educating themselves and others. And as we head back to more normal times, I think we need to retain some of those lessons, and that school buildings are not what makes school. It's the people inside and outside of the building that do. But certainly we know that to maximize those opportunities that we have, having healthy buildings is a part of that. And Keith mentioned that I've now visited every school division in the Commonwealth. That is accurate. I wrapped that up in May. And there are a lot of takeaways I have, but one of the takeaways that I've gained is the significant facilities needs that I've seen around the Commonwealth. I think it was in Buckingham County that I visited the school. I think it was the high school. And for those of you that heard me speak on this topic, I've said this a couple of times, but the cornerstone of the building essentially said something along the lines of, I'd like to thank President Roosevelt and the Federal Works Program for making this school building possible. And when you think that the ability for us to build schools was contingent nearly 100 years ago, 80 years ago, on federal funding, or even the big movement of the funding in the 50s that I'll talk about in a moment, I think it's an important time for us to have a conversation around what the state and federal government's role in funding schools is going to be, especially school construction. So here are some of the big takeaways that we learned in this latest survey that we did of school divisions. We know that enrollment is going to increase in Northern Virginia, and it's going to decrease in South and Southwestern Virginia. We know that our buildings, over half of the school buildings in the Commonwealth are over 50 years old. We know that if you looked at just the approved capital improvement plans, not even the full list of needs that a school division may have, but just approved capital improvement plans, the department in the last 6 weeks has reviewed 117 of the 132 capital improvement plans, and the needs total nearly $10 billion just in the approved plan.
With it? Yeah, I mean, yeah.
You learning anything?
Yeah, a little bit I talked about later. Goldman and I have talked off and on.
Tom,
Casper, your
I'm
mic
actually
is
gonna
on.
hit a break.
You need to mute.
There we go. All right, and then nearly 62% of our divisions have completed HVAC renovations since the beginning of the pandemic. And when we look at outstanding costs for school facilities in terms of what you've already built and paid for, we have nearly $1 billion in school facility capital costs, nearly $500 million in debt service costs, and nearly $7.2 billion, let's say, in outstanding debt on school facilities. And of course, if you don't know, we have about 100,000 students per grade level. So looking at this population growth, I mentioned that Northern Virginia is going to grow and South and Southwestern Virginia is going to see declines. Here's some of the more formal data there. We also are expecting some growth in Region 3, but that's mostly in the Stafford, Spotsylvania, Fredericksburg area. Here is the data on the age of our buildings. You can see 55% of our elementary schools are older than 50 years, 45 to 46% of our middle schools and high schools. If you look at the age of school buildings in each of the regions, you'll see some new buildings across each of the regions, but there's really the median age you can see in Northern Virginia, Northern Neck, Region 3, the median age is a little lower. You get into the western side of the state, the median age is the highest. And so we're certainly seeing older buildings out there. You'll note that there's one school that's 184 years old. I looked it up. That is a school in Bedford. But I think one of the points the commission made that I thought was really interesting is an older building doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad building. Older buildings can have really strong bones, but it's also partly how many times have those schools been upgraded or renovated to modern standards? How well maintained are those buildings? And frankly, with the budget cuts we faced since the recession, that's become more and more challenging. And so when you look at the number of schools that are over 50 years old in the Commonwealth, by numbers, that's nearly 1,000 schools or school buildings, the square footage. And then we did an estimate using, kind of a flat rate price per square foot that was somewhere, I think, between $250 and $275. I don't remember the exact number. But if you looked at the total square footage, if we were to replace every building if we just did the buildings that were older than 50 years, and this, of course, is replacement costs, not renovation, which some might consider. But just to replace the buildings that are over 25 years old, we're looking at, or 50 years old, we're looking at nearly $25 billion in needs in the Commonwealth. So just a quick summary of what we saw in your CIP projects. Even though there are some older schools, as I mentioned here, and that nearly 1,000 schools over 50 years old, in existing CIPs, there are only 81 new school projects, totaling about $4 billion. So that means that the financial situation is such that many of the needs we know go beyond those 81 schools. They're just not making their way to CIPs because there's not confidence that there would even be funding in a 5 or 10-year period, whatever the CIP length is. The median CIP length tends to be about 5 years. You can see that we have 566 renovation projects in the pipeline, another $3 billion, 463 more HVAC projects than have been completed through COVID for another $600,000. And you can see the rest. I asterisked other items. That's frankly, usually buses. So as you're studying this chart, if you see other items, that's usually transportation needs. But you can see the wide variety of CIP projects that are out there. Now, what have we seen in terms of new schools across the regions? And I apologize, I don't remember the exact timeline on this, but I think it was the last 10 years. I'll have to double check my notes on that. But we've seen 17 new schools in Central Virginia, 16 schools out in Region 2, 5 new schools in the Northern Neck, 31 new schools in Northern Virginia, and then 3 in the Valley. At least in what we were reported, no brand new schools in Region 6. There have been some renovations, and then 2 in Southwest Virginia and 7 in Southside. And so you can see a lot of the school divisions that have lower composite indexes are in the areas that are seeing the lowest number of schools being built. So I thought that this was the most interesting piece, and I'm going to run out of time, so I'm going to wrap up with this. I thought we did a historical look on when the state or federal government had roles in funding schools. Probably during the Great Depression, the Works program, Work Progress Administration, built throughout the nation nearly 4,400 schools between 1935 and 1940. One of those, which obviously was the school I think I visited in Buckingham. Since that time, the federal government has been more involved in debt financing, bonds, tax credits, private activity bonds. In the 1950s, there was some impact aid funding that supported school construction. From 89 to 2001, in response to some Supreme Court rulings, there were some capital expenses funded. FEMA has funded some projects. I know in Region 7, one of the 2 new schools that was built was partly built through the Army Corps of Engineers, and I think some FEMA funding because the previous schools were in the floodplain, and so they had a unique opportunity there as long as they combined their high schools into one location. And that's a beautiful facility, by the way, and one that I was able to visit. The ARA money from the recession in 2009 had some limited construction funding and then a couple other opportunities. Generally, your existing federal funds cannot be used for large-scale construction and renovation, such as your Title I, your IDEA. But your ESSER funds are a little bit more flexible. We know we can do HVAC upgrades and air quality, facilitate cleaning, all that. But the newest guidance from USCD says that your formula funds can be used for new school construction, but in the FAQ that we sent out to you, it is discouraged because of the timeline involved. You basically have to encumber all of the money by 2024. There's maybe a 120-day extra liquidation period, and I've been involved in a lot of construction projects. 3 years can be pretty tight if you're not a little bit further along in the RFP process and design process pretty quickly. But I will tell you, we are starting to approve some of these projects. Real estate purchases, capital purchases, especially those with HVAC, and some of those are going to be moving forward. Obviously, if you're more shovel ready, it's more likely. And then just of course, the most popular way that people fund schools is through loans such as general obligation bonds and VPSA. There are some additional state resources that are being looked at. Of course, the commission is considering some things. The efficiency review program can help. The commission is talking about a tool to analyze the highest need buildings that could create new priority lists. And of course, there's not in the Department of Education, but in the state government, they have a $4.3 billion fund that, when you look at capital, it focuses on sewer and broadband and water. They're waiting on some feedback from Treasury to see if they could expand that into school construction. But a little bit on state funding history, and then I'll wrap up. The Standards of Quality does have some funding for O&M, right? FY22 has $624 million, but the state share, the state share was significantly reduced in the recession in this area. We did have some school construction grants that also ended around the time of the recession. The lottery fund also had some specific set-asides. Those were discontinued, but in FY17, those came back, and you can see that they've increased significantly over the last 4 years for non-recurring costs. And there are some required set-asides for things such as maintenance and some allowances for use in facilities. So I had 15 minutes. I probably spent an hour on that with the commission. Those were just some high-level points. But there are definitely some opportunities for us at the federal level and at the state level for funding. And from the Department of Education, we're going to continue to advocate for that as well. And so many of you have a lot of questions for me over the past few months about school construction. We finally got that guidance from USCD. So if you have a project you're considering, I know Bristol is one we looked at, send them our way and we'll continue to consider them. But we know that many of our communities are struggling to keep their facilities healthy and in a modern state. And so anything that we can do to support you or even help be thought partners in that, just let us know. Keith, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Dr. Lane. I want to also say thank you personally. We are starting to see, as more guidance is coming, that flexibility is increasing, and we appreciate. I don't know that you might call it nagging. I don't know, but I've certainly emailed you a lot and folks at the department trying to get assistance with that, and we are starting to see more flexibility, and we appreciate your open-mindedness. I shared with Dr. Lane the other day, I think he said that he had built 12 schools in his time as superintendent. You can look at him and see he's just still a young fella. But that's more schools than Region 5, 6, 7, and 8 have built combined in the last decade. And so we do have some work to do in Virginia. And we appreciate Dr. Lane's leadership. And we know that he'll be a good shepherd as he guides us through this process of using and best utilizing our federal funds. Alec Carlson, I know you got caught up in your breakout room, but you want to say a word before we move on to our next presentation. Thanks again, Dr. Lane.
Sure. Thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Lane, for the information you provided to us. My name is Alec Carlson with Air Mechanical Solutions. We're one of the sponsors for this conference. When we were approached with this opportunity, it was a no-brainer. Air Mechanical Solutions is out of Roanoke, Virginia, here in Southwest, where we see a lot of these World War II, World War I even era schools, and a lot of them need help. And we want to do everything we can on our part to help. We are an HVAC distributor, equipment provider. We work with architects and engineers. We work with school systems directly. And we focus on getting heating, cooling, ventilation, dehumidification, and energy recovery into each individual classroom. So if you guys are on a budget, if you're looking for more energy efficient options, come visit me in the breakout room. I'll be in there all day long in the virtual exhibit hall. But again, we're Air Mechanical Solutions, and we are eager, excited to do anything we can to provide better quality HVAC, healthier air, and options to students, faculty for generations to come. So thank you so much. And we're just excited to be here and excited to support this.
Thanks very much for your support, Alec. And I will say, Dr. Lane will send you, we will have those slide deck available, but the presentation that Dr. Lane presented to the Commission on School Construction and Modernization last week is probably the most comprehensive view of school infrastructure needs in Virginia, maybe ever. It was truly a phenomenal and remarkable presentation, but it was also very sobering. And so Dr. Lane, maybe if we can make that available as well, I think that would be good information for all of us to have. Great job. And again, thanks for your support, Dr. Lane.